Welcome back. So today I'll be talking about Frances Ellen Watkins Harper. She was born free on September 24th, 1825 in Baltimore's free black community. This was during slavery. Both of her parents, their surname is lost to history, had died by the time Frances was 3. She was an orphan, and she was raised by an aunt and uncle, Henrietta and William Watkins, alongside their 8 children. Toward the end of her life, the Boston Daily Globe wrote, quote, "Probably no colored woman in this country has done more for her race than Mrs. Frances Ellen Watkins Harper, and there's no woman more beloved by colored people," end quote. Harper followed in the footsteps of her uncle William Watkins. William Watkins was a prominent abolitionist, minister, and educator who founded the Watkins Academy for Negro Youth in Baltimore, which Harper attended. Harper was a poet, author, and lecturer. Frances Ellen Watkins Harper was a household name in the 19th century. Not only was she the first African American woman to publish a short story, but she was an influential abolitionist, suffragist, and reformer that co-founded the National Association of Colored Women's Clubs. She wrote and spoke against the horrors of slavery and advocated for freedom for black people as well as for women to be acknowledged as full citizens. I'll share a poem she wrote and a speech she wrote and gave, because as always I believe people are best understood in their own words. The title of the poem is The Slave Auction by Frances Ellen Watkins Harper. The sale began. Young girls were there, defenseless in their wretchedness, whose stifled sobs of deep despair reveal their anguish and distress. And mothers stood with streaming eyes and saw their dearest children sold. Unheeded rose their bitter cries, while tyrants bartered them for gold. And woman with her love and truth for these insatiable forms may dwell, gazed on the husband of her youth with anguish none may paint or tell. And men whose sole crime was their hue, the impress of their Maker's hand, and frail and shrinking children too, were gathered in that mournful band. Ye who have laid your beloved to rest, and wept above their lifeless clay, know not the anguish of that breast, whose loved are rudely torn away. Ye may not know how desolate our bosoms rudely forced to part, and how a dull and heavy weight will press the life drops from the heart. So she was never enslaved, and she lived in a free community, but her heart and empathy are evident. The solidarity she shared with her enslaved brothers and sisters. Now the speech is entitled, "We Are All Bound Up Together." It was given May 1st, 1866 in New York City, New York, at the 11th National Women's Rights Convention. In May 1866, Frances Ellen Watkins Harper, a leading poet, lecturer, and civil rights activist, addressed the 11th National Women's Rights Convention in New York, joining Elizabeth Cady Stanton, Susan B. Anthony, and Lucretia Mott, who were among the featured speakers. Her address appears below. I feel I'm something of a novice upon this platform, born of a race whose inheritance has been outrage and wrong. Most of my life had been spent in battling against those wrongs. But I did not feel as keenly as others that I had these rights in common with other women, which are now demanded. About 2 years ago, I stood within the shadows of my home. A great sorrow had fallen upon my life. My husband had died suddenly, leaving me a widow with 4 children, one of my own and others stepchildren. I tried to keep my children together, but my husband died in debt, and before he had been in the grave 3 months, the administrator had swept the very milk crocks and wash tubs from my hands. I was a farmer's wife and made butter for the Columbus market, but what could I do when they had swept all away? They left me one thing, and that was a looking glass. Had I died instead of my husband, how different would have been the result. By this time, he would have had another wife. It is likely, and no administrator would have gone into his house, broken up his home, and sold his bed, and taken away his means of support. She's pointing out that sexism. I took my children in my arms and went out to seek my living. While I was gone, a neighbor to whom I once lent $5 went before a magistrate and swore he believed I was a non-resident and laid an attachment on my very bed. And I went back to Ohio with my orphan children in my arms without a single feather bed in this wide world. That was not in the custody of the law. I say then that justice is not fulfilled so long as woman is unequal before the law. We are all bound up together in one great bundle of humanity, and society cannot trample on the weakest and feeblest of its members without receiving the curse in its own soul. You tried that in the case of the Negro. You pressed him down for 2 centuries, and in so doing, you crippled the moral strength and paralyzed the spiritual energies of the white men of the country. When the hands of the black were fettered, white men were deprived of the liberty of speech and the freedom of the press. Society cannot afford to neglect the enlightenment of any class of its members. At the South, the legislation of the country was in behalf of the rich slaveholders, while the poor white man was neglected. What is the consequence today? From that very class of neglected poor white men comes the man who stands today with his hands upon the helm of the nation. He fails to catch the watchword of the hour and throws himself, the incarnation of meanness, across the pathway of the nation. My objection to Andrew Johnson is not that he had been a poor white man. My objection is that he keeps poor whites all the way through. There's applause here. That is the trouble with him. This grand and glorious revolution which has commenced will fail to reach its climax of success until throughout the length and breadth of the American Republic, the nation shall be so colorblind as to know no man by the color of his skin or the curl of his hair. It will then have no privileged class trampling upon, outraging the unprivileged classes, but will be then one great privileged nation, whose privilege will be to produce the loftiest manhood and womanhood that humanity can attain. I do not believe that giving the woman the ballot is immediately going to cure all the ills of life. I do not believe that white women are dewdrops just exhaled from the skies. I think that, like men, they may be divided into 3 classes: the good, the bad, and the indifferent. The good would vote according to their convictions and principles. The bad, as dictated by their prejudice or malice. And the indifferent will vote on the strongest side of the question with the winning party. Oh, she's a prophet. She sees the patterns. You white women speak here of rights. I speak of wrongs I, as a colored woman, have had in this country an education which has made me feel as if I were in the situation of Ishmael, my hands against every man, and every man's hand against me. Let me go tomorrow morning and take my seat in one of your streetcars. I do not know that they will do it in New York, but they will in Philadelphia, and the conductor will put up his hands and stop the car rather than let me ride. A lady in the crowd, they will not do that here. There's always one saying that Mrs. Harper speaks. They do it in Philadelphia. Going from Washington to Baltimore this spring, they put me in the smoking car. Loud voices in the audience say, shame. I, in the capital of the nation, where the black man consecrated himself to the nation's defense, faithful when the white man was faithless, they put me in the smoking car. They did it once, but the next time they tried it, they failed, for I would not go in. I felt the fight in me, but I don't want to have to fight all the time. Today I'm puzzled where to make my home. I'd like to make it in Philadelphia near my own friends and relations, but if I want to ride in the streets of Philadelphia, they send me to ride on the platform with the driver. Cries of shame from the audience. Have women nothing to do with this? Not long since, a colored woman took her seat in an 11th Street car in Philadelphia, and the conductor stopped the car and told the rest of the passengers to get out, and left the car with her in it alone. When they took it to the station, one day I took my seat in a car and the conductor came to me and told me to take another seat. I just screamed murder. The man said if I was black, I ought to behave myself. What the heck does he mean by that, right? I knew that if he was white, he was not behaving himself, and there's no wrong to be righted. In advocating the cause of the colored man since the Dred Scott decision, I have sometimes said I thought the nation had touched the bottom. But let me tell you, there is a depth of infamy lower than that. Lady, you don't even know it. In 2025, they went further down. It is when the nation, standing upon the threshold of a great peril, reached out his hand to a feebler race and asked that race to help it, and when the peril was over said, you are good enough for soldiers, but not good enough for citizens. What Judge Taney said that he, men of my race, had no rights which the white man was bound to respect. He had not seen the bones of the black man bleaching outside of Richmond. He had not seen the thin ranks and thickened graves of the Louisiana Second, a regiment which went into battle 900 strong and came out with 300. He had not stood at Olustee and seen defeat and disaster crushing down the pride of our banner until words were brought to Colonel Hallowell, quote, the day is lost, go in and save it. And black men stood in the gap, beat back the enemy, and saved your army. And the crowd applauded. We have a woman in our country who has received the name of Moses, not by lying about it, but by acting out. Applause. A woman who has gone down into the Egypt of slavery and brought out hundreds of our people into liberty. The last time I saw that woman, her hands were swollen. That woman who had led one of Montgomery's most successful expedition, who was brave enough and secretive enough to act as a scout for the American army, had her hands all swollen from a conflict with a brutal conductor who undertook to eject her from her place. That woman whose courage and bravery won a recognition for our army and for every black man in the land is excluded from every thoroughfare of travel. Talk of giving woman the ballot box? Gone. It is a normal school, and the white women of this country need it. While there exists this brutal element in society which tramples upon the feeble and treads down the weak, I tell you, if there's any class of people who need to be lifted out of their airy nothingness and selfishness, it is the white women of America. And the crowd applaud. Oh, she did it. She did that thing. This is a beautiful woman with a beautiful mind. So what do you think about the speech? Tell me what you think. Thanks so much for listening.